It seems like every once in a while we're reminded how little video game developers think of the paying customer, or maybe they're just this way themselves and they're projecting it onto the rest of us. Because apparently, for the upcoming Indiana Jones game, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the developers felt it was necessary to add a disclaimer at the start of the game, basically to remind people that the Nazis are the bad guys, as if we couldn't have figured that out ourselves. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle to feature disclaimer clarifying that the developer, Machine Games, decision to use Nazis as enemies should not be in any way construed to condone, glorify, or endorse their ideology. I think that would pretty much go without saying since they're the bad guys in the game and they've always been the bad guys in the Indiana Jones universe, but still, they had to have this disclaimer because apparently gamers are just too stupid to notice that. For most people, it's understood that when a creator chooses to depict something evil in a piece of fiction, especially when that something is also portrayed in universe as explicitly bad, said creator is not endorsing a given behavior or ideology, but rather using it for narrative purposes, often to contrast the moral differences between a protagonist and their opposition. Yes, like I said, this should all go without saying, but apparently Machine Games doesn't understand that. However, the same apparently does not ring true for the video game industry's modern audiences, as like many games before, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle will feature a very performative disclaimer assuring players that despite developer Machine Games' decision to pit the iconic archaeologists against the historical Nazi regime, the studio themselves does not endorse it in any way, shape, or form. And nothing would let me or lead me to believe that maybe they actually do endorse a Nazi ideology. Then they go out like this and say like, oh, just to be clear, we don't endorse this sort of thing. It'd be like if you had a game like this and you have child predators in it portrayed as the bad guy or child predator is the bad guy. And they're like, oh, just to be clear, we don't endorse this person. I was like, well, yeah, yes, thank you. I didn't think you were actually endorsing that. But now that you're coming out and trying to make it a point to say that you don't endorse it, well, now I'm starting to question you because that's kind of a weird thing to say and a weird thing to actually do, putting a disclaimer in like this. The existence of said disclaimer was first unearthed courtesy of Video Game Chronicles' Jordan Midler, who came across Machine Games' message during his recent playthrough of the game as conducted during a recent Machine Games press day. According to Midler, despite the game itself taking players with physically fighting the many Nazis that Indy may come across in his adventure, as well as including the game mechanic that allows for the player to physically burn various Nazi-related propaganda posters, upon booting up the Great Circle, players are met with an assurance from Machine Games that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a fictional story inspired by historical events and characters. Names, characters, organizations, locations, and events are either imaginary or depicted in a fictionalized manner, not intended or to disrespect any historical or cultural beliefs. Is that really necessary? Is there some legal reason why they would have to put a disclaimer like that? Because it's obvious it's a work of fiction inspired by historical information or whatever, historical accounts. It's not supposed to be taken seriously. So I'm just wondering if games like this are required by some law that they have to say this is a work of fiction based off of something or inspired by historical events. It's not real life or something like that. I don't know. I mean, let me know in the comments if there actually is some legal reason why they would have to say that. Further, the statement presumably penned in order to head off the accusation of fascist support. I don't think there would ever be any accusations of fascist support by having the Nazis as the bad guys in this. That would surely have been leveled towards them by the more reactionary and terminally online wing of the American left. I don't even think there's left-wing people within American politics who would say that they're supporting Nazis by having them portrayed as the bad guys. Unless maybe there's someone on the bad guy side who switches, who's more sympathetic or something like that. If that's the case, then okay, maybe I can understand that argument for it. But if it's an Indiana Jones title, I don't expect that being the case. I think just pretty run-of-the-mill Indiana Jones's adventure in the 30s and 40s. So it stands to reason that he would come across the Nazis. They're the bad guys, and it's always been that way. American Left President itself, when booting up the Great Circle, also explains to the more pearl clutching among the game's audience that its story and contents are not intended to and should not be constructed in any way to condone, glorify, or endorse the belief, ideologies, events, actions, persons, or behaviors of Nazis and fascist regimes. I'm wondering if in the game, if they ever do portray them as sympathetic or as intelligent or some other way positive, if they try to actually do that and that's what they're trying to head off with this message. But if they're not doing that, then it does seem very odd that they're going to go out on a limb like this to make sure people know that they're actually not supportive of Nazis. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of a South Park episode. I think it came out probably like 20 years ago or something like that, where they're basically mocking the idea about how directors re-release all their old properties and re-edit their old properties. They're talking about like, oh, it's now the re-release of E.T. where they're replacing them with walkie-talkies. And then they actually did a Saving Private Ryan where like, oh, it's a re-release of Saving Private Ryan where there's guns are all now walkie-talkies and the word Nazi is changed to someone with political differences or something like that. I'm wondering if that's what they're doing with this, or at least that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from this whole ordeal. So going further down, while Machine Game's message is particularly egregious due to it only being included because some players are unable to separate fiction from reality, as noted above, it is far from the first such content disclaimer to be included in a contemporary video game title. From Destroy All Humans 2, Reprobed, warning players that the game's original sex change side quest had been included without any edits, to the Tomb Raider 1-3 collection, apologizing for the series' harmful impact, to Ubisoft apologizing for how some characters and cultural references contain stereotypes in Beyond Good and Evil, the 20th anniversary edition. The current era of video games has gone to great but ultimately unnecessary length just to keep themselves in the good grace of socio-political watchdogs. And I kind of like what I was saying at the start of this. I don't think they're necessarily talking to actual gamers because I think gamers are mature enough to differentiate between the two. I don't even say that they're talking to games journalists when it comes to this either, because despite how retarded they can be at times, I think games journalists can differentiate between the two as well. I think what this is basically just a virtue signal. It's completely unnecessary, but it's something that they're doing just to make sure that the game journalists, when they boot up the game and see that, they know like, okay, this person's on our side. They, right at the start of the game, in a completely unnecessary manner, they decided to condemn Nazis. Okay, so they did that. So then maybe the games journalists will be a little bit more kinder to them because, you know, they're now part of their group. So they can actually be nicer to this game whenever they give their reviews out there. Meanwhile, for average gamers, they're just kind of looking at this like, okay, that's kind of a weird thing to point out, or they're not even going to pay it any mind whatsoever because it is kind of a stupid point. And I think that's really what they're getting at and why they bothered to do that and why a lot of these other companies decide to put these mindless disclaimers that gamers themselves don't actually care about, because it's not necessarily targeted for gamers. It's targeted for all the games journalists out there who may play this game. And it's something that they can keep in mind when they finally decide to actually give their review for the title. But that's what I think about all this. Let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.